So I think that maybe we've got another minute or two before nothing comes in, but I think it gives the opportunity maybe just to tell you a little bit about the backstory as to how the book happened and why we're here. Is that okay? Because it was about, I think now, 5 years? A bit less, four and a bit years. That Joel, who I knew, came into my office, which was, I used to have an office upstairs, FBI Travel in Pignon Road, you know that? Right at the back there, had a great room up there, great space up there. And Joel came in and said, you know, he was looking for a moving house and wanted an office, and and someone told me I managed the space and said, wanted to take some space, and I said, sure. But then he said, but he wanted something else, which is he wanted some advice on using the internet to scale his business. Right? And a lot of what I've done in my past has been around building communities and building revenue through internet sales. And I said to Joe, sure, I mean, I'd love to help, but what do you do? And he said, I'm a business coach. And I said, what's that? Right? And he said, well, I said, look, I don't understand what you do. I don't know if it's any good. I certainly have got no idea if we can scale it on the internet because it doesn't sound like it. I said, but we did a deal. And the deal was that I didn't charge him rent on the office, and he would put me through his coaching business. What he didn't know at the time was that my business was in a dreadful state, right? And I was like, yeah, it's funny now. And of course, in the back of my mind was, well, anything might help, and here's an opportunity. Let's take it. And it was through that process that when we started to apply Joel's principles to my business, that literally the business turned around. I mean, and today, we'll talk maybe later, but I've got a very successful business, and we've grown, well, we're on track going from being almost bankrupt to, well, we're halfway to our $10 million pound target this year, hopefully. So that sort of growth, and we're in multiple countries and all that sort of stuff. And so we got caught up, and I got caught up in rebuilding my business, and Joel did so in helping me get there. Until at one point I said, hey, you know what? You came to me originally for this requirement to scale your business, and, you know, we should look at that, because actually I've been traveling around the world for the last 3 years rebuilding the business, and we've been doing this over the internet, using Skype and using other tools. So I can see how we might be able to scale it, and I'm convinced now it works. And I said, well, you know, we can build everything you want, but we've got to market you, and how do we make a difference? What's the difference between a great coach and every other coach? And he said, well, that's not really the answer. You're saying, what's the difference between a popular coach and every other coach, right? And I said, well, okay. And he said, well, they've written books. I said, well, write a book. And he said, I'd love to. I've got lots I want to say. And I said, well, do it. And he said, well, what sort of book do I write? I said, I don't know. I said, just write a book. I said, what books sell best? What are the best, most popular books? He said, well, books that tell a story. I said, well, great. I said, well, write a storybook. And he said, well, how do I do that? I said, I don't know. So, of course, I went to the guru and to Google and said, how do you write a book, right? How do you write a story? That's what I read it. And up came this thing called Robert Campbell. What, Robert Campbell?
John. It's not John Campbell.
Robert Campbell. Peter Campbell? Anyway, called The Hero, Google The Hero's Journey. And it came out with The Hero's Journey. The Hero's Journey is a structure for a story, which is applied, and if you look at every major successful Hollywood adventure story.
And every legend and myth and fairy tale, they're all structured. From Moses leaving Egypt to,
Star Wars and,
Superman.
The Karate Kid and all these things. And where it is that someone is lost in the desert or lost somewhere, right, gets beaten up. The guru comes and offers to help. He rejects the guru. He then gets beaten up again and goes to the guru for training, goes into training, and then has the big fight, wins the big fight, thinks that he's survived, and then realizes that that's not the big fight, that the big fight, the one that's going to save the world, is still to come. And that's the story. And I said, well, there's 12 stages in that hero's journey. So I said, here's your George, do it. And about 3 days later, he phoned me up and said, look, I've got the outline working. He says, but can you give me an analogy for a businessman lost in the desert? And I said, yeah, that's easy. I said, that's waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, worried about paying the bills. So there's no time where you feel more alone than at that moment. And he said, okay, great. And then he came back a few days later with the next one and the next one. And I said, hang on, Joel, are you writing my story? And he went, I think I might be. Is that all right? And I said, well, I'm not sure actually. I said, but let me. If you're going to do that, let me be involved. So then we sat back and looked at my story, and this is hashkata pratis, I say in this room, but coincidence or whatever language you want to lay on it, was that the hero's journey mapped almost identically to the story that had happened in my life and my business over the last 3 or 4 years before that. And it was like one of those do-do-do-do moments, right? And so then we started to write the book together, and that's really got to the point where I said to Joel at one point, hey, there's something missing here. And that's really, I said Shabbat at the time, but it was really the spiritual essence of what keeps me sane, or what I thought kept me sane. And that's when I went to Aryeh and said, hey, I'm missing this element in this book. Can you give me a Torah or a spiritual model that we can layer on top of Joel's business organizational model? And of course, in his beautiful way, Aryeh said, no. And I said, really? He said, no. He said, but what I can try and do is find the underlying spiritual model upon which Joel's model is based, right? And did that. And what we didn't want to do is, and you may guess, but Aryeh is Jewish. And we didn't want to make it a Jewish book. We didn't want to limit who would see it. And we didn't want to make it religious either. And it's not, because the lessons, what we realized, were universal. But what you'll see if you work through the story is that underlying it is a spiritual model that goes from Rotzon, will, through Teshuvah, which is not really repentance, but review and reflection, to growth and mindfulness, which is Kavanah in our language. So that's what eventually we ended up writing the book. The three of us got involved, and that's what brought us here tonight. So
that's a good segue to pass over to.
Thank you. I almost feel like you want to use that. Use that.
Good evening, and I want to welcome, for those of you who were here last week, just raise your hand if you were here last week. So welcome back. Raise your hand if you weren't here last week. Well, this is a fantastic time to begin this series, because in its own right you will learn so much tonight. But if you were here, you're building on something. If you weren't here, don't worry. I guarantee you, with the likes of the three personalities sitting up front, you will learn an incredible amount despite not being here last week. And I'm sure everything can be found in the book or the recording, etc., etc. So tonight is about staying sane. And it's about the three authors sharing tonight what it is that they've learned and the lessons that they have found work for many people. But just to give it a mystical perspective, as we do here at Spiritgrow, we like that even when we do programming, as my father may have pointed out last week, that is built around upskilling ourselves, it's still important to understand that there is always a spiritual dynamic and a spiritual perspective. I can't tell you how to stay sane, because that's what they're here to talk about. And I don't really know how to stay sane, or else I would have written a book on it. But what I can tell you is why so many of us are not sane. And it comes back to a very, very core part of ourselves. Every single person in this room has a soul. And a soul is a dynamic life force that expresses itself in context of the human via our personality. It is what charges the brain. It's what charges the proverbial heart. It's what not only keeps us alive, but it gives us our feelings and our thoughts, or at least the energy to think. But like any energy, the type of energy you put in is already going to impact the output. And so if you would put red light into a clear container, you will have a container that is red. If you put blue light, shine blue light into a clear prism, you'll have blue prism or container of light. And so the type of soul that we have is going to express itself through our personality. However, as a human with a soul, we can actually, through our behavior, mold and change our soul to bring perfection to it. The Hebrew word for that would be tikkun, a correction or creating an order of a chaos that may exist within ourselves. That lack of sanity, and I don't mean clinically, I mean in our everyday life, is a result of us very possibly being what we naturally are, but it's not actually a death sentence for what we need to be. Tonight's going to be about discovering the skill sets and the tasks that a person needs to go through in order to bring that tikkun to themselves. But what I want you to appreciate is that you are who you are because of your soul. And within your soul, there are 49 basic strengths and weaknesses that every single person has. And every single person's personality is made up of a variation of where they have their strengths and where they have their weaknesses. You may be very strong in 19 and very weak in 30. You may be very strong in 48 and very weak in 1. And as a result of this, your personality becomes who you are. You may be a person that's very obsessive about certain things. You may be a person that's really lousy with time management. You may be a person who fails to connect with things. You may be a person that's really quite esoteric in thought, but doesn't really translate into deed. These are all because of the makeup of our soul. And so over time we discover patterns in our behavior. We find that certain things that haunted us in our behavior as children really just re-manifest in ways when we're adults. And what the consciousness of life helps us is to identify where are we weak and where are we strong. Because if we identify that, then we can learn to not only overcompensate, but we can work on throwing ourselves into areas that we're good and being careful of the areas that we are weaker, so that when we enter into those areas, we do it treading carefully so that it becomes a cause of growth and not a cause of anxiety. And likewise, when we're very good at something, to ensure that our ego doesn't become overinflated, we realize this is a natural gift. Every morning there's a mantra, there's a prayer, there's a meditation. Use whatever word you will, as long as you say the words. That's all that really matters. Modeh ani lefanecha. I give full acknowledgement to you, Melech Chai v'Kayam, the infinite master of all. Shehechazata bi nishmati, that you have returned to me this morning, my soul, my personality, my uniqueness, my individuality, Bechem Rabbi Monatecha, with absolute faith. You, the infinite, have such faith in me that I can correct and I can strengthen my weaknesses and that I can tame and channel my strengths. Now, what is an insane person according to Einstein? Well, at least according to the quote that's attributed to Einstein. What's an insane person? Someone that does the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result every time. So if you wake up every morning and go, right, I'm just going to do the same thing as I did yesterday, I'm going to get upset with what I did, with how I turn out today, you're just on this thing called habit, a nature. You're just playing into your natural self. But the purpose of being a human and not being an animal is to master that sense of self, to master the weakness, and to tame the strength, to recognize that I am what I am because I have a soul, to recognize I am what I am because I have a neshama, which comes with 49 basic elements of expression, which have strengths and weaknesses in my own inner balance. And I'm not going to be afraid to face today. I'm going to be as mortal as anyone else is, and I'm going to embrace the lessons and the teachings that are there to strengthen. People often ask, what is the place of personal growth and the research that goes into that in context of mysticism and Kabbalah? And the truth is, it's a perfect interface. If there is research that is about the bettering of self, that is not called secular. That is just as spiritual as the sacred texts. It may not be as holy, but it is just as spiritual. If you use the wisdom to improve yourself, and you use the wisdom to better your code of conduct and your behavior, then the truth is you're becoming a sane person. And as you become a more sane person, you become a person who a person who is completely able to express their soul, which means the ability to express the energy of the infinite, to bring absolute balance into this world. And so tonight is not a secular subject, not because there might be Hebrew words, but because personal growth and tikkun atzmi, the correction of self and the creating order in one's own balance, is actually one of the most spiritual conducts that one can engage in. And so we're so lucky to have 3 people, not one, but 3 people who have all engaged in this personal growth journey and are all able to teach us with language that will suit everyone in this room. Everyone is going to find that they connect with one of the authors better than the others. And that for that we are fortunate, for that we say thank you that the 3 of you have once again been able to give up your time to speak about the works, to speak about your own stories and speak about the lessons that we're going to gain from tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. I'm not sure if this is on, actually.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, great. Well, hello everyone again, and officially welcome to what is really session 2. That's better. Session 2 in our Spiritgrow series. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Gerschman. I work as a business coach. I help people to grow their business, improve their businesses, improve their lives at the same time. If you were at our book launch last week, so you'll be familiar with the story. We talked about it a little bit earlier on tonight while we were waiting for Rabbi Wolf to come. But we wrote this book together, 3 of us, The Mindful Entrepreneur, which is the true story of how Aryeh and I helped Howard move from a very, very difficult situation in his business and personally. The stress that he was experiencing was immense. And we helped him move to a growing, profitable business and a much deeper sense of personal fulfillment and well-being. And what we'd like to do tonight is just to share a few additional insights. We shared a few last week. We're picking a few additional insights from the book to share tonight. And in particular, we'd like to focus on a couple of things. On the one hand, we want to focus on this idea of building the business. How do you build a business? There's a lot to say about that, and we'd like to pick on one particular idea. But also, at the same time, how do you stay sane while you're building that business? And in particular, when you're faced with the setbacks and challenges and stresses that are natural and inevitable in business and in life. And we're going to spend some time working through that. So what I'm going to do is kick it off with this idea of how you build a business. And Howard and Aryeh are going to talk in more detail about how you manage things when life doesn't exactly go as planned. So let's look at this idea of business building. And if you were here last week, you might remember that we talked about this idea of mindfulness. We called the book The Mindful Entrepreneur. And that's very deliberate because when we think of building a business, we think of mindfulness as a critical skill set. And when I say mindfulness, what I really mean is being deliberate and intentional about the way you run your business. And yet the reality is, for most business owners, certainly most business owners that I meet, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but very often they're not thinking deliberately and strategically about how to build and manage and run and grow their business. What's happening is they're just trying to survive from one day to the next, hoping that the next day will be a little bit better than the day before, but not necessarily thinking strategically about how to move to their desired goal. And yet, I'm going to suggest that to build an effective, successful business, you need to be deliberate and strategic. And perhaps the very first strategic question you need to ask yourself is, what kind of business do you want to build? And if you're in a job and you're not running a business, it's the same question, right? What kind of employee do you want to become, right? It's a fundamental question. What is your vision for your business? Now, let me throw it open to you for a second. Before I talk about why I think it's important, I'd love to get your view. Why is it worthwhile coming up with a vision for your business? I mean, seriously, we're all busy. If you're a business owner, you know that you don't have spare time, right? There's so much you need to do. Just get on with it. Just do it. Forget about thinking about where you're going to go or where you want to be. Why would you do that? Why? Help me out. Inspiration. Say more about that. How's a vision connected to inspiration? I agree with you, by the way, but why?
Gives you a reason why you're doing everything day in, day out, where you're aspiring to head to, what you're trying to build.
So if you've got this big picture of what might happen in the future, that inspires you, gives you something to look forward to aim towards. Nice. Purpose. What do you mean by that? Is it a similar idea? Or?
Yes, similar idea. You've got purpose, so you've got the dream purpose is to achieve, yes? To just go for it.
Again, you're saying it gives you that motivation to keep on going rather than just feeling as though I'm chasing my tail.
Yeah, to start taking action.
Nice. Yeah.
We help to solidify what it is that you are wanting to achieve.
Say more about that. What do you mean by solidifying what you want to achieve?
Solidify in terms of not just having a vision inside your mind, but being able to articulate it in such a way that you can refer to it directly in front of you.
And I agree. And what's the benefit of being able to refer to this vision? That it's not something kind of airy-fairy. It's something that you've actually written down and you can almost look at. Why is that good?
It makes it easy to be able to refer to, to be able to look at it and say, okay, well, this is what actually we're aspiring to be able to do.
Okay, nice, yeah.
I think it also provides direction, like it gives you direction and assists you in your decision-making processes.
Right. That's, again, a fundamental point. If you know where you're trying to go, then you can easily evaluate the decisions you need to make and say, hang on, is this going to move me towards my vision or not? Otherwise, you're kind of just taking one step in front of the other and not really sure where you're going. Yeah, maybe last comment on this. Yeah.
You need to track your progress towards achieving your goals.
Nice. If you don't have a vision, how do you work out if you're even successful? You're just moving forward, but you've got nothing to measure your success against. And hence, having a vision is absolutely critical. And, you know, when I studied under probably the world's most celebrated, famous, business gurus, a man named Michael Gerber. I'm not sure if you've come across him before. He wrote a book called The E-Myth Revisited, which was recently voted the #1 business book of all time, New York Times. His name's Michael Gerber. The E-Myth Revisited. Yeah, the E-Myth, it's called. It stands for the entrepreneurial myth. And I was learning with him, and I went to one of his talks, and he gave a talk in front of hundreds of people. And he said, let me tell you about who I think the best entrepreneur of the last 100 years is. And I was thinking, this is going to be interesting. Who's the best entrepreneur of the last 100 years? And I was shocked when he said it was the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right? Now, he was speaking to a group of hundreds of people, most of whom had no idea who he was actually referring to. And he proceeded to tell a story. And he said, let me tell you why. He said, because the best business owners come up with a vision and then they work hard to achieve that vision. They don't go from one day to the next to the next. And he says, let me tell you about this story. And he says, before the Lubavitcher Rebbe, for those of you who haven't heard of him, a great leader of world Jewry, before he became that leader, he was an engineer working in the US, for the US Navy. And he used to catch, I don't know if it was a train or a bus, to work every day. And at his bus stop or train stop, there was a young lady who was sitting there, and she was reading a couple of different books. And he noticed that she had two books. One of them was a kind of trashy romance novel, and the other was a book by Isaac Asimov. Anyone heard of Isaac Asimov? Yeah, the science fiction writer who wrote a series called the Foundation series. And he pointed to that book and he said, read that one, that's better, not the romance novel, right? And she said, why, you've read this? He says, yeah, sure I have. And she said, what do you mean? And he says, in fact, I actually know him. I correspond with Isaac Asimov. She said, wow. And he said to her, you know what? And I actually want to do what he talks about in his book. And she says, what do you mean? Well, for those of you who've read the Foundation series, you'll know that it talks about this alien race who comes to planet Earth and intends to inculcate the people of Earth with the values, with their values, to try and make the world a better place. And what they do is they set themselves up slowly in different communities around the world, and they slowly try and bring the world to a deeper level of consciousness, if you like. And he says, that's what I'm going to do. And she thinks, wow, that's really interesting. Anyway, she doesn't see him again for 40 years, right? Didn't even know his name at the time. And 40 years later, she gets presented with a book. I think it was a book called Towards a Meaningful Life, which had a picture of him, and it talked a little bit about his achievements. So 40 years later, she sees this book, and it says the Lubavitcher Rebbe set up 4,000 Chabad houses around the world and completely changed the face of world Jewry. And she said, wow, this guy actually did it. And he said he was going to do that 40 years earlier, and that's exactly what he set about to do. And when Michael Gerber told that story, he talked about the significance of this idea of vision, of having something clear that you're aiming for before you set out to do it. And I thought to myself, that sounds really interesting, and I think it's right, but I didn't understand why it is that just having a vision could actually affect your behaviour. And the truth is, I didn't understand it until I had a certain experience, a terrible experience actually, but it really taught me a powerful lesson. A few years ago, I don't normally tell this story publicly, but I'm going to say it tonight. My wife was involved in a terrible freak accident where our fireplace, we have one of these fireplaces that you pour sort of a methylated spirits type substance in and you light it. It's one of these kind of new fireplaces, environmentally friendly, but unfortunately, as we were pouring it, it exploded into a giant fireball. My wife was engulfed in a giant, literally in flames, and she sustained burns to 25% of her body, most of which was like third-degree burns. And I mean, she's okay and functional now. She has long-term scarring, but she's able to function, etc. But after that experience, for the first few weeks, months, even a year and a half later, I had these flashbacks of that experience. And I could see the fireball come out, and I can vividly remember it made this like whoosh sound, and I can see it in my mind's eye. And whenever that happened to me, I actually took a step back physically. Even though it was only in my mind, but whenever that flashback occurred, I actually went like this. And I felt myself move. And I thought to myself, what's going on? I mean, it's just an image in my mind. I'm clearly not experiencing it right now, but it actually affected me physically. That vision of the fire moved me. And it taught me a powerful lesson about this idea of vision. When you have a vision in your mind, it can actually move you physically, right, towards something. And that's the same with a business. When you have a vision in your mind of what you want to achieve, it can actually move you physically. It can inspire you, in Brett's words earlier on today.
Can I
yeah.
just add one thing which I did mention, which I found was very powerful, was that it didn't only do all these great things for me. What it enabled me to do was do it for people who work with me. That actually being able to share a vision, whatever it was, it didn't really matter, but with clarity to the people who are around you and people who you want to work with you and drive your business forward, suddenly it got a lot of the rubbish out the way. There were all these other conversations of like, well, this is where we're going, so is what you're doing, can you get behind that? And if you can't get behind it, then this is probably the right place for you to be. But if you can, then let's do it together. And that was a massive, massive relief. It actually, the consistency of having a team together with a single vision was very powerful.
Right. And so people often ask me, and certainly Howard asked me when we started working together, well, how do you come up with a vision exactly? And
Apple Watch.
That's it. And there are actually three helpful components to what I would consider to be a powerful vision for a business. And it's these three ideas. Number one, it's what kind of niche do you want to be involved in your business? In other words, which kinds of customers do you want to serve? When I ask the question to people, what kinds of customers do you want to serve in your business? They say, many people say, anyone who comes through the door. I'm happy to serve anyone, right? What's the problem with that approach, by the way? Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't serve, I'm not saying if someone comes through the door, yes, you should serve them. But why is defining your customers as anyone a problem?
It's a shotgun approach.
Not specific.
Because it's not specific, and we're
Not
actually targeting
specific,
anyone in particular.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah?
You also can't do your best work for those people.
Why?
Your visions they don't match often.
Oh, you may be having people coming in the door who you can't serve as well as others.
And they've got very different criteria for what's
They've
important.
got very different criteria. You know, one of my favourite stories is the story of, Michael Dell of Dell Computers, right? I don't know if you knew this, but he became the most successful paperboy in Chicago's history when he was a teenager. In fact, he sold so many newspapers that he bought himself a BMW at, I think it was age 16. How did he do it? You know how he did it? Right? Most people, when they did door-to-door, when they did selling newspapers, they went door-to-door, right? They picked a street, and if they were clever, they may have picked a certain suburb, but they street to street, and they had at best a 10% success rate. You know what Michael Dell did? He went to the births, deaths, and marriages register, and he looked for the names of people who had just got married, right? I think it must have been in the 60s or 70s. And he went only to their houses, right? Only to them. Why is that a good place? Because at that time, when people had just got married, there was a good chance they'd just moved into a new house. And when people had just moved into a new house, there's a good chance that was the time they were looking for a newspaper subscription. And as a result, he became the most successful paperboy in Chicago's history, right? That's called thinking deliberately about who you want to serve. Next is a what. What products or services do you want to deliver? Right? Which ones are most profitable? Which ones are not? And where geographically do you want to be located? The next point here is your stretch goal. What will the result be? How will you know you're successful? Right? How will you define that success? And last of all, what's the time horizon? In other words, by when? Can I throw it open to you for a second, Howard? We went through this whole process. What was your vision that you came up with for your business?
I think, I mean, there was lots of pieces to it, but the principle was to get to £10 million revenue by 2020.
And that was so that's the result.
That was the stretch
and
goal.
the time horizon.
The time horizon was, yeah. And the who and the what and the where, well, within the terms of my business, it was to focus on extending my reach within the legal sector, where I provide lawyers with services, software and services, and that was to get a 60% of the market, own 60% of the market
in
that
the
I was
UK.
In the UK, yep. That's right. Geography as well, and then also to break into what we call the third and fourth tier banks, because I had a certain focus that I thought we could reach that, and that was looking at those two tiers exclusively. And I think it was just coming back. We had a conversation this morning, which I thought was very interesting, because I used to be a lawyer. I'm all right now. I've recovered, but you haven't, no. And I remember I was talking to a lawyer, and he said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Who, what, and where." And it's the same thing. He says, I have clients. He said, they come in, I serve them. I said, yeah. I said, but with what products? He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, what products are more profitable for you? He said, what are you talking about? He said, I charge an hourly rate. He said, I charge, whatever, $650, $750, $150 an hour. He said, and that's what I get. I said, yes, but some products are more profitable than others because you don't have to do all the work, or you don't actually have to spend all your time doing it. And we looked at wills, for example. And I said, you don't, huh? Divorces, but... Okay, maybe, but I don't want to get divorces. I hate divorces. But yes, but we talked about wills, and I said, well, hang on. And he took me through the process of writing a will. and what he did and how he charged his time. And I said, well, look, that last time when the clients come in to sign the will, do you really need to be there? He said, oh, yeah, it's essential. I said, but why? I said, all you're doing is witnessing them signing the will. He said, oh, they all want me there. I said, what, at $350 for your hour to sit there while they're signing? Yes. I said, well, I tell you what, why don't you give them an option? Get your secretary to sit in and do it. Teach her how to do it, and get your secretary to do it, but offer it to them for $200. And say, I can knock off $150 on the signing if I don't come. Oh, he said, of course, every client said, yeah, don't worry about it. $150 there? Yeah, sure, if it's just a signing. So that was like, which product was profitable and which product isn't? And which clients do I want to target with what products? So it applies to every single business, right? I don't care whether you're in a profession or you work on your own business or you work in a larger business. I think it's relevant.
Or you have a job.
Yeah.
Right? Ask the same question. What's your vision for that job? What would success look like in the next year, in the next 3 years in that job? Same question. Here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like everyone in the room just to take a couple minutes to think about this question in terms of your own business or your own organisation, your own job, and start to provoke yourself. Right? You're not going to be able to answer this question today in 2 minutes. It takes much longer to really think through this. But I'd like to start the process tonight. So can I get everyone just to take a couple minutes and ask yourself these 3 questions?
I want to add that when I said 10 million a year, I was almost bankrupt. Okay? And we were well under, we were about 350 grand a year at that time. So it was ridiculous, right? So don't think that...
And the whole point is to stretch yourself.
Sorry, when you say who, what, where, it's really hard when you think you know your target market, but really, what you really want is this. You almost feel it's hard to put it into words, like it's hard to ask for what you want, you know.
So say more about that. When you say you think you know your target market, but you want a different market, so
yeah,
what do you mean?
You know, like I've had a set, I design expensive children's wear.
Yep.
And I sometimes think, you know, a lot of my target market, especially when they had the store, they buy things on sale and online. Now I'm not really doing the sales. There's more dollar value per sale, but I don't get to see the customer. I don't necessarily know who the customer is.
Right.
It's really hard to figure out who I want in a way.
Right, yeah. What you're saying is you don't know who's actually buying your products right now, right? Which is, in some ways, a really important realization, and you should be actually trying to find that out. And there are ways to do that. And the reason you want to find that out is because if you know who it is, you may know where else you might be able to find them and target them. If you know what kinds of people, it's going to give you a clue as to where those kinds of people hang out, whether that's online or offline. But without knowing, it's very hard to be deliberate. It's just kind of random, right? Yeah. We can talk about how to find that out, but it's a great provocation.
I think that very important is when you think you've got vision of your achievement, it's very important to touch the final feeling, the enthusiasm, the happy, the achievement. Then when you attach the feeling, you go for it. You see the achievement, you achieve 100 million,
Yep.
and you see yourself success and celebration, like we had a few months ago, celebration 1.5 million. You see the vision of celebration. Yeah, I've got now 200 million or whatever.
I think what I've learned also in that was that I set the big stretch goal, and that was terrifying. That wasn't exciting. That was just fearful. It was like, what the hell am I doing, putting a number out like that? It was really important I did so because it changed the way I thought about things moving forward, which I'm sure Joel would touch on. But I think the point was also is to set within that smaller milestones that you celebrate. Okay, so yeah, I want to get to 10 million, but when I get to 500,000, I'm gonna have a party, right? And when we get to 1 million, right, we're going to go and take a weekend away. And if we get to, right, and those smaller things which reinforce your own success, which are really important because we work hard. It's not like because you put this out there, suddenly it gets easy. It doesn't. You still have to work hard. But it's recognizing that, hey, yeah, we're actually moving forward. Are we on track? Are we behind? And then celebrating those moments, I agree, yeah.
Yeah, that's a fundamental point. And I wasn't tonight going to go into so much detail around that, but it is definitely a recommended step is to take the big vision and say, okay, that's where we want to be in, let's say, 3 years or 5 years, but in order to get there, what are the milestones we need to hit along the way?
And Joel broke it down to a month at a time. What's we going to do this month? And what are we going to do in 3 months? And where are we going to be? And suddenly it was like, okay, I can cut off that piece. I'm confident enough to try and achieve that.
Yeah. Maybe let's ask one question and then we'll transition over. Yeah.
Just a quick question on this. Do you think that you can do this process on your own, or are you recommending to do it with someone?
Great.
Sorry, there
Let me
Depends who you
answer
are.
that. So obviously in Howard's case, I did it and Aryeh did it with Howard. We recently created an online course where Howard, Aryeh and I all created videos describing the process in a whole lot of detail with real-life examples from Howard's business and other businesses. And we've provided a whole range of really practical templates and tools and resources to enable someone to go through the process themselves. And so, yes, we believe strongly that it is possible with support, right? With some guidance through some videos and resources. Yes, you can. But some people also like to be guided through.
Can I also say it depends on your self-discipline and how much of a mess you're in. At the time, I couldn't get my head out of I was putting out fires all the time. There was no way I was going to find the headspace to see a way forward. And I needed someone else to be able to bounce it off. And what we have done, and I think the breakthrough of what I believe because of the way we've done it, is that we've broken things down into small, digestible pieces. So you go through the course and it says, okay, today you're going to define who your target market is. Here's the theory, here's the process, here's the workbook. Now go away and do it. And when you've done that, come back to the next video. But don't come back to the next video until you've done that. It shouldn't take you more than X amount of time.
And then email us if you've got questions, which is...
Right? And I think it's that sort of thing. So some people have really discipline and can do it. Others we have either email help or direct help or even face-to-face is available. But, the intention is to try and scale this and make this available to a lot of people. And so, we did it through Skype. I mean, we didn't meet after a while. Now, most of our meetings are done on Skype.
Look, this question of vision is a big one. And as I said, you can't answer it in just a couple of minutes. But I wanted to spark this process in your minds, get you inspired about it, and encourage you to go away and really think about these questions much more deeply as it applies to your business. What I want to do, though, is recognise that you can come up with the greatest vision in the world, but the reality is that there will be challenges and setbacks and disappointments and stresses along the way, as Howard experienced and as many of you have probably experienced. And the question becomes, how do you deal with that? Right? You've got the best plan in the world, but what happens when reality doesn't line up with that plan? How do you overcome it? How do you manage it? I want to pass it over to Aryeh and Howard to talk about that aspect.
Thank you. So I'm coming tonight to burst the bubble, I think. We've got this vision and this beautiful sort of idea and inspiration that Joel has painted and that Howard has come up with. But you think about an athlete. I often think about an athlete, a boxer or an Olympic athlete who has put in 4 years of dedication, discipline, vision. Obviously, these high-profile athletes, a lot of psychology is involved in there, and about having this vision, and having the plan, and having it exactly very clear how to get to that goal. And you can imagine as they stand at that line and that rifle, that gun's about to go, and they're about to shoot off, and they halfway 50 meters into the 100-meter sprint, and they pull a hammy. They pull their hamstring. Or they're in a boxing match and they're down for the count. And it's 1, and it's 2, and it's 3. And they're at 8, and it's already, the bell's about to ring, and they dig deep to come back up. Or the artist, the writer, the author, the musician, the painter, who has been rejected time and time and time again. You know, my bar mitzvah, I will never forget this. Nearly 30 years ago, I was sitting at my bar mitzvah and my grandfather got up to speak. And he says to me, Aryeh, I have an important message to share with you today. And I was like looking at the audience, looking at the crowd, looking at my pile of presents there at the back. He says to me, Aryeh, look at me. I've got something really important I want to tell you. And he told me words that are etched into my conscience, and I think about them, and I've repeated them often. He says to me, Aryeh, throughout your life, you're going to make mistakes. He says to me, I want you to make mistakes, but I want you to learn from them and never repeat them. I fulfilled the first part of his instructions. I've made plenty of mistakes. Unfortunately, I'm still working on the ladder to never repeat them. And there's a quote, and I'm not sure, there's a wise man who said this, that the only thing we learn from history is that we never learn from history. How many of us have made the same mistakes, gone through that again and again and again? And what I want to offer you tonight is a way out of this, like a glimmer of hope out of this, because it's inevitable. If you think that you're going to take Joel's fantastic strategies and instructions in the book, and you're going to wake up tomorrow morning and you're going to share the world, share the vision, with your vision with the world, and hope that everyone's going to be there waiting for you with open arms, you're in for a big reality test tomorrow morning. You're going to confront reality in a very interesting way. In my opinion, chapter 8 in this book is the most important chapter. Because you can have everything in place. You can have all the systems, all the strategies, your own personal vision, the way to apply that vision in your day-to-day life. You can have all the structures, all the employees, all the business, all the cash flow, everything there. But if you do not have the tools, if you do not have the resilience to cope with a setback, you're finished. I watched my parents for 16 years run their business. And there were many times where I heard the conversation around the dinner table. I think it's time to close up. And every time they tried again and again, and it was tough. And it was tough. It was tough on us as kids, and it was tough on them even more. But they knew what they were going to. They had a mission, they had a goal, they had something that they want to achieve. And they went and they continued. In this reflection, what's called, this is probably, as Howard said before in the introduction, we try to keep the model, the spiritual model, or the mindfulness model, a-religious. I didn't want to be called Rabbi in the book. I wanted it to relate to as many people as possible, and the universal truths that are there should touch everybody, and everybody should be able to relate to them. There was one that I could not, and that's this one, reflection. Reflection is you look at the 3 steps, and the word that we use in the book is actually called teshuvah. Teshuvah is reflection. Teshuvah is returning. It's returning to a state that a person was, a state of purity, in the spiritual terms, a state of purity that a person was before he made the mistake that he made, the spiritual mistake that he made. And through a very clear process, picking oneself up and moving forward. And it's a step, the first step is introspection. The second step is to articulate that mistake. And the third step is a commitment to move forward. Because one of the hardest things is when a person gets into that setback, faces a challenge, the hardest thing is the ability to pick yourself up and to move on. to shift that blame, to shift all those negative emotions and all those negative feelings, and to pick yourself up and move on. And in the book, Howard, at this point, worked through his vision. He had a strategic plan. He was motivated, and he was pumped. He was really pumped to make it happen. And then he's confronted with a major challenge, and I want Howard to share it with you because he'll do it much better than I can.
I hate this bit.
Yeah.
I've not done this one before. This is all new for us, right? And I think you need to understand is that we wrote the book as this was occurring, as this was all unfolding, and we didn't know where it was going. And just 1 minute of context. So several months before, my managing director had basically mutinied and had kicked me out of my own business, in effect. Told me to go and take a break, and that I was the problem for the business, and why the business was failing was me, and that if I stepped out, he would fix it. Hurts right now. So I did that. I stepped back, and the business basically imploded. And it hit worse than ever, until eventually I went back to fire him, and he came and said, "Don't problem, I've solved the problem. I've found someone who's going to buy the business." I went, "Buy this business now?" "Yeah, and they're going to offer us a ridiculously good price." And I won't go into it. So, of course, that deal was supposed to happen on the 23rd of December, and it was supposed to give us enough money to survive, I guess, not enough to be rich by any means, but a way out, and I was going to change my life and do everything else. Anyway, of course, the deal fell through. They came back and offered me less than half what the original price was on the last day. And I had to decide whether to take the deal or not. And anybody who's been in a tough place before knows that, when your back's against the wall in that sort of situation, it's very difficult to turn down an escape route. And in the process of about to sell the business, that's where Joel and I had carried on designing a structure, because the buyers had said, "Look, yes, we're going to buy the business, but we want you to put together the business plan for the business moving forward. And then not to be involved in building it, but just do the plan." And we'd done that. So we had all laid out. It was all ready to go. And I was excited by it, and I was disappointed because I wasn't going to be doing it. And then the deal came to less than half what they were going to offer, and I had to make the decision whether to move forward. And it was at that point that Aryeh said, I said to Aryeh, "But hang on a minute." I said, "If I'm going to do this again, if I'm going to do this, what makes me feel I'm going to succeed?" I mean, from my perspective, I'd failed, right? I'd got to a point where I was going to sell the business. It was firehouse sale, right? So I'd failed. So I said to Aryeh, "Well, what makes me think that if I'm going to go back and step back into the business, I'm going to do it any better?"
So Howard, let me just stop you there. Maybe we'll do a demonstration of how the process went. Because the truth of the matter is, Howard was sitting behind every great man is a greater woman. And he was sitting with his wife at the table, and she tells him, "Come on," and excuse my French, as it says in the book, "get off your ass and go and get go and sort it out." And that's when Howard contacted me, and we went through the following process. I taught him, and we worked through this process, and we're going to try and do it tonight. So the first step is introspection. And introspection is really about calling to mind and reflecting on the outcome that you hope to achieve and why you didn't achieve that outcome.
So the idea is that you do this internally while we're doing this. So think of, and of course you're all massively successful, so haven't failed in anything, unlike me, right? So think about something that you have failed in before.
But call to mind something that you wanted to succeed in. It may have been a test. It may have been a business that you wanted to create. It could be a relationship that you wanted to foster, to develop. It could be really an emotional or personal growth thing, and you fell short. Try and call that, just to bring that to mind. Now, in order to think about why you didn't achieve that outcome, the strategy that I used with Howard and the strategy that I use in my own spiritual work, in my own spiritual growth, is to ask myself this question over and over again. And we actually recommended to Howard to do it 10 times. To keep on asking this question as a mantra almost.
To come up with 10 answers. Ask the question and answer it 10 times.
And the statement is, to finish the sentence, I didn't achieve this outcome because. So,
What about if third party?
Yeah. I'm going to say,
Third party.
so
Okay.
exactly. So my first one was, well, the reason I failed last time was because of the global financial crisis, right? We would, some were too young to remember it, but those who have been there, especially in my business, the law firms just stopped ordering instantly. And I didn't know if the business was going to survive. So it was the global financial crisis that was the problem, not me. The next one, I think, was the clients, right? I went through, that's right, the one I picked at that time, sorry, I'm getting caught up in the thing, was specifically the cash flow crisis. Right? I had a specific cash flow crisis that meant that I wasn't able to pay the bills. How was I going to fix the cash flow crisis? And what did I do wrong to make that crisis occur and to fail in that arena, right? And so I started to blame the global financial crisis. I blamed the clients because they didn't pay on time, right?
Investment, or you invest somewhere. Are you involved in small?
Don't worry. It wasn't. So one was the. Yeah, well, one was global financial crisis, one was the client's fault, the other was my managing director's fault, of course, because he was the one who should have gone out and collected the money, right? I mean, that was his job. So I went through, he said 10, and the first 3 and 4 and 5, and then I realised that they were all about someone else. It was everybody else's fault. Right? It was the global financial crisis, it was this guy, it was that guy, it was the clients, it was the product, it was everything else. And that's why you do the 10. Because eventually you get to the point where you run out of other people to blame, right?
It's only you.
Yeah. And I started to think, okay, so what was my failure? What was I the root cause of? And I started to recognise where I hadn't first of all, I hadn't overseen the managing director. I hadn't told him what to do. I hadn't given him guidance, right? I wasn't clear, right? I hadn't had a system in place to collect cash from the clients. I had no process. Right? So I hadn't actually implemented anything to make the money come in. Right? That I actually hadn't taken responsibility for making sure money came into the business. Right? And it was, is that where we're at?
Yeah.
well, that's really that first stage, and maybe this is why people are so reluctant to engage in the tshuva process. And it comes that time of year, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we've got to start thinking about tshuva, and we're so hesitant and so reluctant because we come to the realization, hang on, what am I doing? And if it's true in the physical world, perhaps it's true also in the spiritual world and the emotional world, how am I responsible for where I am at this stage of my life? And it's important at that point to then articulate it. The second two is to really articulate it, because what happens is we fester this negativity, we fester these feelings inside of us, and if we don't find a way to express them, they just burden us and consume us from within. And therefore, in the tshuva process, one of the ways is to actually articulate it, to say it out, and actually to write it. Some people write it down in a journal, or to articulate it, just simply mouthing the words, expressing it, communicating it, saying it out. There's a certain release where this problem, this mistake, this struggle, this challenge is no longer trapped inside of me, but it's now outside of me, and now I can deal with it. Now I can handle it. Now I can manipulate it. Now I can recraft it. Now I can recreate it. And from here, use it as an impetus to grow and move forward. And that's what Howard did, and brought us to the last stage.
Hang on. So
Yeah,
just
go
to
on.
say, in the articulation, it was really difficult. right? I mean, you feel really... I went out on my own. I drove down the Ocean Road, and I found a quiet space to do this, get in the right space. But I'm really pleased I did, because I felt really stupid speaking out loud. First you think, who's listening? But it was incredibly powerful to say, to actually own. The bottom line is I hadn't taken ownership. That's the words that came to me, right? I hadn't taken ownership of the business. I left other people to take ownership and to run things rather than me be mindful and engaged in the process. I'd run around, put out a lot of fires, and I was, a nightmare to be around. They used to call me Hurricane Howard in the office, right? Because if I was arriving, it was like batten down the Huttons. Don't get close to Howard because it'll be a problem. So I came up, this phrase just came to me was, take ownership. I hadn't taken ownership. And when I said that, there was that, I don't want to go over the top, but there was a sense of, okay, that's done, now what? And I think that's where you're going to get to that commitment stage, which was, okay, now I've got a choice. What do I want to do? And the commitment there was to say, I'm going to take ownership. It's my opportunity now. Now I see it, I can now move forward with it.
But with a difference, because you don't want to go back to that original quote, the only thing we've learned from history is that we never learn from history. Here, you've gone through the process of introspection and articulation. You've learned from history. You've learned from history. You've learned from your past. But now's the commitment to actually take the lessons learned and use them to move forward. And when you can do that, when we can do that in our own lives, it's incredibly freeing and it's incredibly empowering as well. Because you know what we do? We look back at those experiences, at that failure, not as a problem. We look at it as a blessing in disguise. We look at that we had to go through that experience to bring us to where we are now. Howard had to go through his experiences that we detail in the book to bring him to the state that he's in now. And every future struggle that we go in is only an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to learn and to discover something about ourselves that's dormant inside and that we don't perhaps even know is there. But when we face that struggle and we have to be true, honest, authentic, and raw with ourselves, we discover something about ourselves that we didn't know that's there. And I'll just finish with this, that the Talmud says that a righteous person falls 7 times and gets up. We all fall. And the difference between those who are successful and those who aren't is the ability to get up. Is the ability to get back up and face the challenges and do what we need to do, learn from our past, learn from our experiences, and move forward. And I wanted to share, I don't know if Howard, you want to read it, or this is a great quote, and this is the commitment statement in the book that Howard actually came up with. This was Howard's commitment moving forward.
I'm going to start before it says the paragraph, I don't remember. It says, I began grieving for the loss and the opportunities I hadn't fulfilled. And I even said it out loud to myself. I then reflected again on the business plan. The opportunity is still there. If only I can begin taking ownership. I've caused pain to my family. I'm now going to have to go away, that's to London, to do it right and set it up properly. The business can run without me, but only if I create it that way. I can't just sit back and hope that it will run itself. I need to have the courage to make it happen, the confidence to do it the way I think it should be done. I'm fortunate to have some amazing advisors. Oh, this is why you asked me to read that. But ultimately, it's up to me. No excuses.
So that's the process. It's not that complicated. It's simple, it's straightforward, but on the other hand, it's complicated. And the complication is overcoming the hesitation to engage in it. If you can do it, it really gives you back that hope to reconnect back. It's almost everything in the book is a cycle bringing you back And it gives you the opportunity to reconnect with your vision. The stronger your vision is, the easier you're able to overcome the setbacks, and they bring you back to the vision that Joel spoke about initially. If there are any questions, we're happy to answer.
You might want to, I don't know if you want to come up and say something just before you do really quickly. I just want to say, first of all, thank you very much for listening and engaging. I hope these ideas were helpful for you. Hopefully that you can apply them in your businesses and your lives. Just wanted to let you know that if you do want to pick up a copy of the book, it is selling up the back. It's normally the retail price, if you were to buy it at a normal bookstore, it's $30. It's selling for $25 there, and there's a facility to take credit cards if you're interested. But believe it or not, this is not just about selling books for us. We really want this to impact and reach as many people as possible. And so therefore we have a invitation on the on your sheets of paper, on these little sheets of paper on your chairs, where one of the most powerful ways for us to get the message out there into the world is to get to the bestseller lists of Amazon. And what that does is it helps us reach a global market with this message and hopefully help many, thousands of people. And so what we've done is we're selling the book, the ebook on Amazon for 99 cents, and we've given you $1 here. So it's not actually going to cost you anything. If you jump on Amazon and buy the ebook, even if you're also going to buy the physical book, it will really help us get the message out there. So we'd love it if you could do that. And if you enjoyed it, to leave a review on Amazon would be amazing as well, because it really has a really big impact. So thank you.
So we've got 2 questions, 1 and 2, and then we'll formally close, but I'll ask everyone to come forward with any further questions after. Shelley.
So I want to ask, you mentioned something about an online course. Can you give us more information about that?
Yeah, sure. So if you jump onto our website, which is mindfulentrepreneur.co, you'll see it talks a little bit about something called the growth system. And the growth system is, it's an online course that takes you through a process, the same process that Howard went through, right from coming up with his underlying business vision and strategy, through to developing a sales and marketing process to grow his business, through to setting up systems and processes like I talked about last week so the business runs smoothly, and right through the mindfulness strategies that Aryeh has been talking about in step-by-step detail. And there are videos of us explaining the ideas, walking through real-life examples, and then there are templates that really just guide you through the process. So you could do it yourself. And there's a facility to ask us questions and email it to us if you want our feedback on it as well. Yeah, it's very deeply aligned with the book, but it goes into more detail than we could cover in a book, right? The book, gives you the overview, if you like. There are a lot of practical strategies in here, but we couldn't put all of the information in here, and all of the information is in the online course.
I think if you were to do the online course, it would take you wouldn't do it in an hour. It would take you a lot longer than reading the book. It's a process. It's actually a self-directed program to teach you and work it into your business. The whole point is that I've been to too many. You come to a lecture like, I'm going to take ownership of the fact that this is not going to occur for us, because I used to go to these sessions and I'd listen to these guys go, that's great. I'd take the papers, I'd get back to the office, I'd put them on the corner of the desk, and then they'd stay there. And then eventually they'd move further and further away, and then they'd tip over one day into the bin and I'd forget about it. Because finding the time to implement is the hardest thing for a small business, right? And so that's why we've tried to break it down into small pieces that you can actually apply. And it's I think, again, one of the breakthroughs for me, and it just occurred, right? We're not so brilliant, but it's how it happened, and we just recorded what happened, was that it's this now being called a holistic approach. It's the combination of implementing business processes and systems that make sense, that are critically necessary to build a successful business, but having that personal requirement to resilience, because it does go wrong, right? There is Donald Trump. There's Brexit. I mean, you know, we were on target for some huge numbers this year, and because my back office is in Israel, right, and the pound has lost 20%, I've lost my profit this year. Now, I didn't do anything wrong, right? But shit happens, okay? And so the resilience to be able to deal with that is a core part, I think, of being a good businessman.
And that is included there in that.
And that's part of the book and the process.
Thank you very much, everyone.
So
and
before
feel free to come
everyone
up after.
gets up, and I'm going to invite people to do come, I'd just like to close. And normally we give our presenters a gift, but I thought that to be sincere, that I'd give them all a genuine gift of thanks. And this is really a testament to who the three of them are. When Spiritgrow first started, there was a person that kind of got his head around it, and hearing the story, I realized it was so much more than what we got back then. But he actually built Spiritgrow's first website, which was like this, oh, wow, it's so beautiful, it's so functional and everything. And if you think about it in context of the story we've heard tonight, that was a massive gift from Howard and his team 11 years ago. So it's actually us saying thank you tonight, not just for tonight, but for 11 years of web presence. I'd like to say a very big thank you to Joel, not just for presenting tonight, but it was 10 years ago that my father said, can you have a word with my son? He's a bit of a cowboy. He doesn't have much structure. He doesn't really know if he's Arthur or Martha. And Joel sat down and is a great reader of people and said, I actually think I know someone who is better than I at helping your son, he said to my father. And he actually hooked me up with a very close friend and a colleague of his who speaks regularly here as well. And as a result, Spiritgrow has developed order in the way it operates its madness. And possibly one of the greatest lessons I ever learned was actually from Aryeh Goldman 10 years ago, almost to the day. It was Shavuot Eve. I was a young rabbi in town, and I was pretty full of myself, and I was asked to speak in a synagogue on Shavuot night. And there would have been easily 80, 90 people there, and I was quite proud to get up and had a great time slot. It was like 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. Everyone's there, and I did a really, really good job. And people were laughing, and I had, you know when you're doing well and everyone's involved, and I could go over, and the moderator says, 3 minutes left, and you can go another 20 minutes, no one's going to get upset because you're doing well, and all full of myself. And I let just a comment go about a particularly great mystic of recent history. And it was probably somewhere between rude, slightly inaccurate to speak like that. And the next rabbi speaking after me, after the 3-minute break, was Aryeh Goldman. And he just gently criticized me without putting me down, but just questioned whether it was the best way to make the point. And I left soon after that, not because of the feedback, but because I was going to get on with my night. But I've lived with that gentle piece of feedback. It was in Hamayan on Inkerman Street. And it was with that piece of feedback that I realized that no matter how good you think you are, you better think twice before opening your mouth, because if you're good and people are listening to you, you have the responsibility to teach and to do it with dignity and honesty, and not to fulfill your own pleasures and build your own ego. So I want to say thank you to the three of you for helping actually form Spiritgrow in your own individual ways over the last 11 years, and being able to continue giving to us through tonight and last week. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
You can approach the speakers.